Hey, everybody. I just wanted to thank you for being a Maverick subscriber. These exclusive episodes are just for you, and we hope that you're enjoying our original ministry content based on Barna articles and news headlines and our game content. If you know of somebody who's in youth ministry and is not a Maverick subscriber, please share your email and invite link with them so they can join this and hop in on these exclusive episodes and content for them and their ministry. Cue the intro. Well, Mark, welcome to the podcast, man. It's a joy to have you on. We've been trying to schedule this for a little bit, and it's been a long time.
It's taken a while.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've seen you in the Dallas area, and we've both been moving and doing different stuff since then. So tell our viewers and our listeners what you've been up to in 2023.
Well, in 2022, since I left Youth Specialties, I resigned from my post there and Planet Wisdom student conferences and all that back in 2016. It's hard to believe it's been that long ago.
Yeah.
And not really knowing exactly what God had for me. It was kind of, I felt it was just time to move on and hand the leadership baton over. And so I did, kind of going, not knowing. And before I knew it, I was a nonprofit consultant and was helping a lot of different organizations with a lot of really exciting projects. It was really exciting season of life. I mean, really fulfilling deeply. And in 2022, one of my clients, movement.org, they asked me if I'd be the interim CEO. And coming into 2023, I took the interim off my title and kind of stepped in a full-time capacity there. So yeah, so even though I'm living in Dallas, I'm commuting to New York, where our headquarters are there, and also around the globe. So it's got a global element to it. So it's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed it. And interestingly enough, the issues that most countries are dealing with right now and the church is dealing with globally have to do with young people and next generation discipleship, which has been the focus of my entire life. But even more recently, David Kinnaman and I, the president of Barna Research, wrote Faith for Exiles. And so that's become a kind of a really important subject, what we discovered about young people that are staying in the church. And interestingly enough, World Vision, Biblica, Alpha had us do a global study of teens, and we used some of the same profiling frameworks from Faith for Exiles in that research in 25 different countries. So as I've been doing this global element, it's given me kind of an opportunity to be helping other country leaders and youth pastors within other country networks, pastors, figure out how are we reaching the next generation. So it's been really exciting.
That is really exciting, man. That's awesome. I just happened by coincidence, it was not planned. I did have the book right here with me.
Hey, there you go. Yeah. I can't hold it up because I got a green screen. And
it'd be all blurry and yeah.
Oh, actually, I have a copy right here.
It'd be invisible. Yeah.
There we go. It's invisible. So yeah, it doesn't. Bad
awesome.
Planning on my part. I should have chosen the blue screen instead of the green screen. But
that's funny. And I actually, man, yeah, the timing of this actually worked out really well because yesterday I got to hear David's keynote at the Executive Pastor Summit. Maybe I think it's for the EFCA on that study. And I got to watch and take notes and everything. He talked about, it's the biggest study you've ever been a part of, 26 countries, like 5,000 interviews. And I'm like, wow. 25,000 interviews? Okay. That makes a lot more sense.
This is insane.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So, wow, that's really great timing. It was really exciting to hear him talk. And yeah, that's really cool that your work with, because I even just looking at your websites, if people are like, what is Wisdom Works? What is movement? Looking at those websites, they can kind of see how those interchange a little bit just with the direction of how do we make this area better? How do we make a community better? How do we think better? How do we root it in the gospel? And for this episode, we're talking about some terms that you've expounded on for decades, creativity and wisdom, going back
Yeah.
to learning to be a magician, heading up Planet Wisdom and youth specialties, and giving insight for Barna, which you still do. And now your current stuff with Wisdom Works and now Movement. You've dedicated much of your life to learning what people think, why they think, how they think, and then guiding them to hopefully think better. So I don't think you would have engaged in all those things if you didn't think creativity and wisdom were some pretty key values and characteristics that we should be thinking of. When it comes to young people, we always want to be have those at the front of our mind. So Mark, the first question I have for you is definitely a wide open question. Through the
Love
decades
it.
and all
Love
these
the wide
ministry,
open.
yeah, me too. For all the ministry opportunities you've been in, how have you grown in your understanding of creativity and wisdom in your personal and professional life?
That's a great question. And as you look at kind of the arc of time, it's interesting to see where things go from a seed of an idea to something more. So I was a part of these conferences with this guy, Dawson McAllister, who did these large discipleship Bible teaching conferences. And he brought me on to be the magician, not because I wanted to be a magician, but because I could do magic.
Yeah.
And I was okay. I was adequate.
Yeah.
The real reason was I was kind of like a backup for him. Like if he should go down, they needed somebody who could maybe cover Bible teaching, because they had thousands and thousands of young people coming to these events, and they didn't really have a backup teacher. And this was like 6 or 7 hours of the conference was this teaching.
Wow.
And so people that were speakers and teachers didn't want to sit around and wait for Dawson to get sick doing nothing. People that were comedians and jugglers were typical comedians and jugglers. And so
Yeah.
they didn't necessarily have this other side that could do this other thing. So I was this weird hybrid because while I was at Biola University studying, I picked up this magic thing that I'd been interested in since I was a kid. And they were like, hey, would you want to come and join us? So when I left Dawson, I was trying to figure out the reason was I was getting ready to turn 30. And I thought to myself, if I am 30 and I'm still a magician, I will always be a magician. And there's nothing, most of my friends are magicians. So there's nothing wrong with being a magician if you want to be one. But I was like, I don't think this is what God's called me to be for all of my life, but I could get stuck there, right? I could get caught like Bob Denver on, who's Gilligan on Gilligan's Island.
Yeah.
He played all these roles in movies and television programs. And then once he was Gilligan, it was like he couldn't escape it. And I just kind of felt like if I'm 30 and I'm still doing this, I will forever be the magician. So I stopped cold turkey and was like, okay, what do I talk about? And most youth ministry things at that time in the 90s were focused on evangelism and evangelism training. So we either brought young people to an event to let them hear the gospel and make a decision, or we were training them to go out and share the gospel. Nothing wrong with that. Greg Steer, who has Dare to Share, one of my closest friends, he's dedicated his life to that. But I was kind of feeling like there was this deficit in actual Bible teaching. Like, how are we really helping students see the holistic application of the Bible to their lives? And so as I was thinking about what does a young person need to grow, I just was reminded of Luke 2:52, which was, Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and men. And I was like, that word wisdom, Jesus grew in wisdom. How do we help young people grow like Jesus did? How do we help them grow in wisdom? So it kind of got me fascinated with that subject. I read every commentary, every book I could get my hands on at the time. There wasn't a lot. But over the years, as we were able to start doing fMRIs on our brain, on healthy people's brains, so the only way that we kind of learned about like how our brains worked was through people who had brain injuries, brain trauma. But now we were able to do with fMRIs, we were able to study the brain of healthy people and run creative experiments. And so people started trying to understand what wisdom was, what knowledge was, and wisdom was starting to be linked to pattern recognition. How does pattern recognition work in our brains? And I'm reading all this literature out of the kind of neurobiological field going, oh my goodness, that's what Proverbs is. Proverbs is a collection of patterns. And if we can learn how to recognize these patterns, and so a young person grows in wisdom, like Psalms 119 promises, I'm wiser than my elders because I've studied your word. And this idea that, well, God's word helps us to identify these patterns and these rhythms so that we can grow faster. So my whole discipleship model around what I was trying to help young people do started being focused on how do I accelerate their acquisition of wisdom. And that was kind of the beginning of Wisdom Works and what we were trying to do. But then James Surowiecki wrote this book called The Wisdom of Crowds, talking about how groups of people are often smarter or can make better decisions than one expert alone. And that became really interesting to me. And I started discovering how people learned and how facilitating groups could help reveal pieces of wisdom inside of people that they could collectively use. And that kind of led to getting really interested in facilitation, especially as I started going into consulting. How do I take a room full of people and leverage the wisdom of the entire room? So I'd have all these executives, and I did this for Awana, I actually used Legos and a method called Lego Serious Play to help them unlock the wisdom that they had about what they needed to be doing to help disciple young people as the world is changing and we're going through different generational cycles, and the church is changing. How did Awana need to change? And so we were able to get that group together, and they built these Lego models, and it kind of manifested their wisdom to help them have some breakthroughs around the direction they were going. So those are kind of the things that I got really interested in.
Yeah.
And so there's always been this just interesting relationship, though, with creativity. And so my understanding of it has changed, I think, as academia and the sciences have kind of come to understand how our brain works. And I realized, wow, God has given us the software of the scriptures to match the hardware that he built in us. And so seeing those dynamics together as one is not mutually exclusive of spirituality, but actually become accelerants when we understand them together. So those are some of the ways things have changed for me over time,
Yeah. No, I love that, man. When you think about the process and kind of where you've been, it really helps you to reflect, like, man, if I had the knowledge that I had now back then, would I still end up like where I am now? And I think when you're talking about, oh man, suffering, or you're talking about just how you become wise, it can be a conundrum of, we have this much time, we have this finite life before we experience eternity with Jesus, and how are we using it? How are we stewarding it? But within evangelism focus, which you talked about at the beginning, kind of really getting into youth ministry more full time. We're always thinking about forward, like what's to come, what are we looking toward? And I think our hope in Jesus roots us there, which is good. But I asked the question about those two terms, and I love how you talked about them individually, but then together. Because in leading for this next question, I think the way that we handle those, we might use them together often, but I think the way that we hold those and people actually use them is different. And something that I've always appreciated about you in your writing, or especially in your keynote speaking or anything, is that I think you capture the importance. I remember at Planet Wisdom hearing you talk about sociology stats of, people, kids who are born in 2011, they might have 5 different careers and 20 different jobs, or, thinking about what's to come, and then also thinking about what are memories as a kid, or how did you grow up in the faith? But also I think what you do now with movement and then Wisdom Works probably is really root people in the moment. And like, what are we doing now for the gospel? Like, what's to come is important. Where you've been is good, but it's not just those two things. Like right now, how God is using you impacts a lot. And
Yeah, it's a
yeah,
convergence, right?
it
It's a
is.
convergence of all those things, because
Mm-hmm.
we obviously are, God created us to be born in a certain physical body with a certain DNA that's been passed down for generations.
Yeah.
And then he also, through his spirit, regenerates us.
Yeah.
But then we're also born at a unique period of time. And so, looking at those three things all together and going, Lord, what are you doing? Right? Like, that's a really exciting kind of just, thing to kind of consider, because there is nobody that's ever existed just like you.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that God said, there's a reason for you to exist, and there's a reason for you to exist in this time and space, in this moment in history.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a fascinating thought, to wake up to every day. But,
Yeah.
to your question about wisdom and creativity and how we use those things. So, you know, I think for me, the creative journey has been an interesting one, because, magic is one, the magician thing is one form of creativity. And then, like, art is like another kind of creativity. And sometimes the
Mm-hmm.
two intersect.
Yeah.
Uh, and so it helped me kind of to think about the fact that there's, like, I think especially those of us in youth ministry, creativity can be really um, about kind of um, being clever at times. Like, oh, he's so clever. And, like, when we alliterate all of our messages, or we come up with an acronym for something, but sometimes that cleverness actually isn't the same as invention, right?
Mm.
And the craft of what we do isn't art. And I think that there's kind of like an importance for us to understand that there's like a creative spectrum,
Mm.
one that's about novelty and one that's really about innovation.
Yeah.
And I think that we have to understand the difference between those things, so that we're always pushing ourselves deeper in our creativity. Sure, there's, for a Wednesday night activity, that novel, clever, um, type of crafty creativity may get us by in a fun way. But if we're not touching on those deeper forms of creativity, we're missing out on part of, who God is in our lives. And, then flipping over to the wisdom word, wisdom's interesting because um, think about why you go to a wise person, right? Like, why would you seek out a wise person? It's usually for some advice. And think about what you're doing, right? So take that pattern recognition thing that I said earlier. So when you go to a wise person, you're basically saying, here's my life story, or here's my situation. And they're running it through every pattern they have experienced in life. And they don't even realize how many millions of patterns are running it against. Who are you? Are you married? Do you have children? How does this family affect you? What part of the country are you in? What's your ethnic background and makeup? Like, there's all these things are going in to inform all of this. And the more that those things are in alignment, those patterns are in alignment with God's way of seeing and valuing life, then the more accurate that wise counsel is going to be. And that's going to be different for other people. And um so creativity helps us to see things from multiple perspectives, to
Mm.
see multiple options and possibilities, but also helps us to see beauty, helps us to see what is good. Because you can have creativity that's ugly too, right? We've all seen people create and make things that aren't great. It's still creative, it's just not great. And so creativity is kind of also this pursuit of what is beautiful, what is pure, what is good, what is right, what is just. And so that goes along with this wisdom thing of running across all these patterns. I mean, with AI right now, we're thinking a lot about patterns. We're thinking a lot about, how
Mm-hmm.
does this happen when, we type in some words and all of a sudden it's creating a piece of art off of those words. It's taking all these patterns, putting them together in a new and unusual and different way. And it's trying to do it while still adhering to maybe rules of beauty and unity and order that artists have identified and kind of defined. And where they get those ideas from, a lot of that came from nature.
Mm-hmm.
from what God originally created and things like that. So that's interesting as well to kind of consider that. And so for me, as I go through life, I'm always looking for the patterns. I'm always looking for, and is there a pattern that I can adopt, and does that now becomes a part of my toolkit? That becomes a part
Mm.
of the way I think, process, counsel other people. But James warns us there's wisdom that comes from above, and there's wisdom that comes from below. So wisdom can also be an earthly kind of a wisdom. Like, how do I succeed? And so it was interesting. My daughter, who's a musician, she was talking about somebody she was envious of, who's got a career that's kind of taking off right now, still not widely known. But she was like, Dad, do I have to, use my sensuality, um, in an inappropriate way to be able to, is that the path of a pop star? Even though she doesn't
Mm.
want to be a pop star, but is that the path that you have to take to be famous in this sector? And it's like, that is a pattern you could follow, right? And but are there other patterns that are based on purity and righteousness and doing what is good and that's wholesome, and so let really paying attention to those things and realizing that there's a lot of wisdom out there, but there is wisdom can lead you, depending on its where those patterns come from, selfish ambition, gain, all that stuff that comes from the earth
Yeah.
versus what comes from heavenly wisdom. And so all wisdom is not equal.
Yeah.
So I just answered a lot of things there in those things about the creativity
No,
of wisdom, but hopefully that's helpful to somebody.
it is very helpful. I think.
I
I
love just
think.
riffing off of this stuff.
Same, bro. I like doing that and just listening, because it makes me think of like, oh, I didn't think about that because the original question I was going to ask is actually like the answer you just gave on how you use those differently is probably the answer. So when I think of on a very linear, probably 2D scale, I think when
Mm-hmm.
it comes to that convergence you mentioned earlier, like we're all walking Venn diagrams, like we all have this convergence, right? And so when I think in a 2D way, when we think of wisdom, we usually
Mm-hmm.
think of, or people usually employ it as, well, here's what was and here's what will be better in the future. And it seems like creativity is usually limited to the moment. And it seems like you have those two together that kind of function in those. But the way you talked about the depths and layers of creativity and
Mm-hmm.
how interwoven wisdom is and how wisdom can like highlight some of those as well, I think that's kind of, instead of like trying to spread out and maybe make the Venn diagram lines bigger, like going deeper, right? Which might seem like a cliche metaphor, but going deeper actually allows you, I think, like maybe like even rings of a tree and just like the life in the
Mm.
tree and how it grows. And, a tree can be wide and cover a lot of space, but, just like the fig tree that Jesus cursed, it looked good, but didn't have any fruit. And, there can be a terrible looking tree or a tree that doesn't look so good that has really good fruit. And it's the life in the tree. It's a source of life in the tree. And so thinking about the ways that God made us and expounding on that instead of trying to, well, I have to think about creativity and wisdom or any other characteristic that's good, of like, how do I apply it in all places all the time? And that's probably a 2D way of thinking about it, where we need to think 3D and like, what are the depths of what God has given us and how he's created us? And then how does my life experience, people I meet, the reason I'm placed in this area that I'm placed, the church that I'm at, with the family I have, the period of time I'm born in, how do I like plunge deeper and think about how God's created me and to live that out instead of just trying to take good stuff and spread it everywhere. I think going deeper is, like you talked about, it's probably the better way to think about that.
Well, take creativity, for instance, right? So what's the first thing we learn about God? In the beginning, God created, right? First line out of the Genesis, the attribute we know about God is that he created.
Mm-hmm.
So he's a creator God. Okay. How did he create? He created perfectly. Everything he created was perfect. None of us can create with that kind of perfection. But what is the archetype for that creative perfect, right?
Right.
So what Jesus made was unique. What God made was unique. Nobody's ever seen it before. He spoke it, into existence. The more we study about things that God made, we realize that not only were they unique and original, but they're also captivating. There's a beauty to the things that God made. They have some kind of logic to them that makes them beautiful, and aesthetic to them. And then there's a third thing, and that is um, they're functional. We're learning more and more that things that we thought were maybe just beautiful attributes in a bird or an animal or a plant or whatever serve like this really deep functional purpose. So when we think about our creativity, one great thing is this unique, right? And as human beings, we can only plagiarize God. We don't have the ability to be truly creative like God was creative.
Yeah.
We're confined by the spectrum of color. God is not, which is exciting to think about a potential restored earth where we could make new colors that nobody's ever seen before. But you've got the uniqueness. So how unique is what I'm creating? How captivating is it? Is there a beauty to it? Something that draws me to it? And sometimes it's not even a beauty. Sometimes it's a horror thing too. The cross was a horrific, moment. And think about how many artists have painted or depicted the cross, because there's something about the horror of that moment that's also beautiful and captivating. So it has that element to it. And then functional. What is the purpose behind this? Does it have a purpose beyond those other two things? To me, keeping those three things in tension kind of helps me think about creativity. Is this unique enough? Is this captivating? Is this got a deeper function to it that may not be obvious? Those kinds of things kind of propel me as I'm thinking about creativity.
Yeah. I love that, man.
To go
I love
deeper.
that.
As soon as you said 3D, I was like, I'll give them three corners of a triangle.
There you go. Yeah. I like that, man. Yeah. Got to shatter that fourth wall and make us just think something else. Very cool. Yeah. Mark, this has been fun, man. I could talk to you for a long time. But I want to honor your time and thank you for coming on. There's several ways.
Hopefully it's not been too esoteric. I mean, talking about big ideas like wisdom and creativity, not your typical youth ministry fodder,
but yeah, there's a lot of how-to books and other episodes we've had and people can listen to, and books and methods from people who can do a lot of things. But I'm the maverick, so everything is in my wheelhouse. So it's totally good. I prefer to have those more esoteric, abstract conversations personally anyway. Maybe it's just me getting old and wise, hopefully. Yeah. So tell us how people can keep up with you online, and if you want to, you don't have to. A little birdie told me that you might be working on a book. So do you want to tease any of that?
Yeah. So interestingly, I'm actually writing a book on people who are spiritually curious.
Okay.
In all the research that we've done at Barna for Alpha, He Gets Us, the American Bible Society, I started noticing this pattern that there was like this group of people that I felt were maybe uniquely spiritually curious,
Okay.
but not completely religious, right? We're learning a lot about this group as we've been doing this research, but a lot of times when we think about the non-Christian, we tend to think of some kind of atheistic person who is hell-bent on doing their own thing and living their own way. But what if there's like 1 out of 3 Americans are actually curious about spiritual things? The hypothesis of the book is kind of does the church know how to engage the spiritually curious? And curiosity and certainty, I'll tease you with this. Curiosity and certainty are both a pursuit of something that's not known, but they have different motivations.
Okay.
Curiosity is like an open, expanding kind of posture. Certainty is a move toward closure, right? And so some of what we're finding in our preliminary research, you have to finish the book. I got to finish writing it. to be able to share all the conclusions. But the question is are most of the people in the church people that were pursuing certainty? And so they've closed themselves versus a spiritually curious person who's actually like looking constantly to learning more. And how do those two things play themselves out culturally in the environment of a local church community? And is that maybe one of the reasons why curious people have a hard time with the church, or ultimately embracing it is because they're actually not looking for the same certainty that that person in church has found, because that was the purpose of church for that group. And so we're missing out on reaching another group. There's some other ideas there, but
Yeah, that's a really good tease, though. Yeah,
yeah. Is that a good tease?
it's a good tease.
So
Yeah, I like
yeah,
that a
it really
lot.
shapes a lot of things about the way we structure our content, the way that we engage people, and it asks us also, do we really believe the Holy Spirit is working in people's lives? And are we really confident in this truth that God has given us, not just through the special revelation of Scripture, but also in creation to accomplish good work in people? And
Yeah.
it's a really provocative thought.
Yeah, provocative sounds kind of paradigmatic as well. Like it sounds like it's going to really demand our attention of how we even do church, which is a good thing to revolutionize and reform how we're making disciples, which is really cool and
Well,
really needed.
there are people out there looking for to know God more and more and more, and we want to make sure we can be the ones to help them.
Very cool. Well, tell us what's the best way, one or two ways people can keep up with you on social media or online, and what you're doing.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, for as much as I'm supposed to be about like, youth culture and all this stuff, I kind of am not as active on social media as I used to be, but I am on all the socials, from LinkedIn, yawn, to Twitter, do I need this? Instagram, I'm not great at documenting my life through pictures, but I try every now and then. And then probably the thing that I interact with most on is just my actual Facebook friend page. I have like one of those like, personality page of things or whatever, and I don't do a great job of engaging there, but just my regular old friend page. That's where I have the most interesting conversations.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of been the place where the activity is. But markmatlock.com, I think maybe has something. I don't know. I used to have a website called wisdomhacker.com. I think I still do.
Okay.
But that the fact that I'm not sure tells you there's fresh posts there, folks. No,
Yeah.
there's but
Probably
that's a
not.
place
Yeah.
where you can find a newsletter. Well, I will send things out to people there that
Okay,
kind
that's
of
helpful.
let you know what's new will happen there, so you can sign up for that newsletter on wisdomhacker.com.
Okay. Very cool. Well, Mark, thank you, man. I'll be praying for you as you engage with movement fully, no longer as interim, but main CEO, and excited for
Oh,
the book.
wisdomworks.com.
Oh yeah,
That's
wisdom. There's
that
wisdom
yeah,
works.
that's
Yeah.
the actual thing that pays me pretty regularly.
Can't forget about
Yeah,
that.
that would have been
Yeah.
yeah, I'm a terrible marketer, self-promoter. I was not made for the influencer generation. We had to
Yeah.
do it the old-fashioned way with the lick stamps.
Yeah, there's too many things. There's a lot of things. Well,
Yeah.
I will definitely I'll put the links for like movement.org and that kind of stuff in the show notes. People can in the YouTube description. But thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for what you have done. And yeah, be praying for you as God continues to use you in ministry for his kingdom. Thanks, man.
Hey, you bet. Thank you.
Well, that concludes today's episode. Thanks so much for watching and being a subscriber. Make sure to share our Maverick subscription with those who aren't a part of it. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Have a good one. Adios.